All right. Well, good morning, atheists, agnostics, skeptics, free thinkers, whatever you like to call yourself. I'd like to just say a little bit about Seattle Atheist Church, as we have some new people here. And the reason we call ourselves atheists is because we will never do anything supernatural up here from the pulpit. And the church is founded on the principles of scientific naturalism and secular ethics. We talk a lot about critical thinking. And this particular book, Crucial Conversations, seems like a lot of people have the book, was suggested to us by Jack. And the reason for that was because this being an atheist church, there's two things that happens. One, we are covering some new ground in terms of things that people talk about when they come to church. We're kind of still figuring it out as we go. And in fact, if anybody here would like to be part of that process, we're in the process of actually writing out on a week-by-week basis what we think we might cover year after year and collecting materials and all of that. And then the other thing is that we don't expect that there will be agreement. In fact, we like to build it right into the process that there will be disagreement, because by definition, in an atheist church, everyone is expected to really think for themselves. And so it should naturally occur that we're disagreeing, because we're not like having a dogma that we expect people to buy into. So this morning we're starting a 3-week series based on the book Crucial Conversations. And the book is Techniques for Talking When the Stakes Are High and things get emotional. So this week we're going to focus on the individual and how an individual can show up in a conversation in a way that's helpful. Next week we look at sort of the specific techniques for when you're in conversation with somebody and that other person starts acting or behaving in ways that are trying to sabotage the conversation. And then the last week is the part on decisions and how do you make decisions and come to consensus and then make sure that decisions are followed through on. So last week I was at home and I was visiting with some of my family, and I had a really wonderful time. But one day, one of my kids decided to lob out a conversational starter. And so just randomly, we're all sitting around, lounging on the couches, and one of my kids asked, why do some people believe in fairies? And it provoked a really stern response, the sort of response that tells you that what in Crucial Conversations they would say, it tells you that somebody doesn't feel safe. And the very stern response was, because they do. And it's not your job to talk them out of it. So at this point I looked up from my reading and I realized that we weren't really talking about fairies. And I thought very defensively, and truthfully, that no one in my family has ever tried to talk anyone out of any belief in the supernatural. And in fact, the part of the history of Seattle Atheist Church, for people who don't know it, is that about a year ago, my kids were attending a summer program where other kids kept telling them that they were going to be going to hell because they don't believe in whatever the other kids believed in. And so whenever I do this, I assume I'm already talking to people who are at least open to hearing an atheist talk, or they wouldn't be here. And the subject just got dropped there. Now, a few weeks ago, Jack did a talk on death and grieving and the atheist perspective on death and grieving. By the way, at seattleatheist.church, you can find all the past talks if you're interested in watching any of them. And in it, Greta Christina talks about that atheists often concede ground when it comes to death and grieving, that there really aren't any good secular answers on those topics. But that's not true. And then she goes on, she has a whole book, which is really what his talk was about why actually the secular perspective on death and grieving can be also meaningful and beautiful. And but she says, we concede that ground. And it's kind of a shame that we do, because the pool of information available is diminished because it's lacking the secular voice in there, or the atheist voice in there. And I realize that in many areas in my life, not just on death and grieving, of course there's appropriate time to talk to people about things, but that in many areas of my life I can see the ground and don't give an atheist perspective. And it just shouldn't be that scary to say we believe there are natural explanations for things. So, the conversation about fairies, we just kind of dropped it there, but there might be places where we want to have a voice in the conversation, and this book hopefully will make it a little safer. In the book, the authors say that there are two ways that people fail at having crucial conversations. And one way is that we do them badly, right? We get emotional, we get crazy, people withdraw, people blow up. But the other way is that we simply don't have them at all. So if at work, in your marriage, between friends or whatever, that when something comes up and it would be awkward to talk about it, we just don't talk about it. And that is also a way to fail at having a conversation. So why do we do that? Why do we avoid conversations? And I think everyone here knows why. It's because we don't feel safe enough to have them, right? And I was thinking I would add some corollaries to that it doesn't matter anyway. This whole conversation is hopeless. There's too much of a tide going in the other direction. And so hopefully this book will give us some tools. But the first step is to just be brave enough to start a conversation that matters. And I've seen a meme going around on Pinterest where it's just be brave enough to start a conversation that matters. So the way that people blow up conversations falls into two categories. Some people withdraw during I guess I should ask, first of all, I see a lot of people have the book. Have people read the book? Do people get the book? Some of them. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Yeah. So one of the ways that people blow up a conversation is, the first way is to withdraw, right? And this is kind of a passive way. So see if you recognize yourself in any of these behaviors, right? So here, there are like 20 ways to do it. 20 ways to withdraw from a conversation and 20 ways to act aggressive in the conversation with the same result that the conversation is guaranteed to not go as well as it could have. So the first is to clam up, right? Uncomfortable, avoid the conversation. You can physically move back from the speaker, or kind of participate a little in the conversation, literally go in the other room. Depending on the conversation, flee the room and refuse to take phone calls for the next week. And you can say less than you know. So we're having a conversation, maybe it's at work, it's about a budget. The big hairy elephant in the room is that we all know we're spending a lot of money on X program, but we just don't even bring it up. So say less than you know. Say what you know, and this is one I've been guilty of. Say it in a kind of non-committal, nonchalant way. Just kind of ease it into the conversation, but, hope that somebody picks up on it. Talking under your breath, kind of muttering is a way to let people know that you're, there's something going on there. Talk about the situation to everyone except for the one person who really needs to hear it. Hope it gets back to them. Later, you could say, well, I told, this one and that one. I've been talking about it. Answer a direct question indirectly. So, another one that I find that I'm guilty of, my husband will say, are we having salmon for dinner? And I'll say, I was planning to have chicken. What about that salmon we bought? I got a really great chicken recipe. I don't want to just say, I ate the salmon for breakfast or whatever. So like answer a direct question indirectly and hope that the person will kind of get off it, And all of these things are ways, really, to be passively manipulative and dysfunctional. We don't want to think of ourselves as being manipulative, but the point is you're trying to manipulate the conversation in a way that makes it a little more comfortable. And make no mistake that when you do these things, you are doing something. And I think as a person who myself, I tend a little more to the passive side than the aggressive side, I like to tell myself that I didn't do anything, right? You know, like you didn't blow up or whatever, so you didn't really do anything. But taking a passive route is still a behavior, and it's something that you are doing. So the first step is to notice yourself and to own your behaviors. So it's not that he or she makes it impossible for you to speak up, and he or she didn't cause your withdrawal. Rather than he or she being the cause of your withdrawal, simply that you can own, my style is kind of passive, and that is the reason that I withdrew instead of stayed bravely in the conversation. And if you have an aggressive speaking style, then some of the things are like kind of the exact opposite. But when the conversation takes a high-stakes road, you start speaking firmly or raising your voice. You might even curse. You might do aggressive body language where you kind of lean forward across the table, ball up your fists, point a finger, make threats. And there's also the passive way of making threats too, like the threat that somebody's going to lose your friendship or lose, your support. But the more aggressive way of making threats is kind of like, you tell your boss something they don't want to hear, and then next week the schedule is punitive, right? Bring up unrelated stuff just to hurt someone. Repeating yourself, and just generally not listening. Even getting very emotional and saying things like, I can't handle this, are kind of aggressive ways to manipulate the conversation. And there are dozens of examples in each way, in each category. And what people tend to do is always think that their way is somehow kind of better than the other way, right? Well, at least I'm not aggressive, but the aggressive person might feel like at least I'm, come forward or whatever. Hey, Josh. And so the first step is just to have the crucial conversations, right? I think it was Alice Walker who said, we give away so much of our power by not realizing that we have it in the first place. And so we do have power to bring up conversations, even if they're uncomfortable and awkward. And then step 2 is to notice our own argument style and to own it, okay? I want to understand that I am the cause of my own behavior. And my taking responsibility for it helps me to master it, okay? So, now number 3 is much harder. Number 3 is that before you go into your mode of passive or aggressive behavior, there's going to be some physical sensations in your body. You might notice that you have a clutching feeling in your stomach. You might notice your heart is racing. You might notice shortness of breath. Your hands feel warm. Whatever it is. And then what happens is, almost immediately after feeling that physical sensation, and most of us, we're not even in tune enough with the body to figure out that we've had the physical sensation. We jump straight to number 2, which is making up a story about what it means, and then kind of the what it means part is also how we're going to respond to the perceived threat. So what we want to do is notice I have a feeling in my stomach, and then instead of shutting down and refusing to say anything, if you're a withdrawing type, and then making up a story, in the future, I will not get myself in this position again. No, I'm not going to be in this kind of discussion again, or whatever. So you move immediately into something which is really not helpful. Instead, stop and notice the feeling in the stomach as it arises, and just try to be there. As long as it takes. We have a feeling, particularly if you're in a meeting at work or whatever, that you will feel pressured to have a comeback or whatever, but it's okay to just lean back in your chair and take a moment. And as your brain keeps leaping forward, you are doing this to me. You are the cause of my upset. Stop yourself and just stay with, I have a feeling in my stomach, or whatever it may be. Now, sometimes these crucial conversations come at us completely out of the blue, right? Sometimes it's even intentional that your partner, whoever, instead of saying, hey, I need to talk to you, can we talk Friday night or whatever, they just try to hit you with something off the cuff, or at work it might be a hallway conversation or whatever. Hey, by the way, did you see the new budget? And so it may be appropriate to take a break and to actually have some words ready, like, I'd love to get my thoughts together about this. I'd like to pull some data that would be helpful. And can we meet later on this afternoon to discuss it? But be aware of if you're using, can we postpone this conversation, as a withdrawing technique. Because we all know people who say, can we talk about this later? And what they really mean is, I'm never going to have this conversation. Okay, so if you say, can we talk about this later instead of time for the meeting, then please do get together for the meeting as planned. And more about, during conversations, notice your physical responses and try not to assign any meaning to them. Just try to soften the body and take some calming breaths. Now, the fourth point, when other people act crazy. Okay, so up till now, over half of all of this is like controlling myself. And mostly I think when we think about conversations, crucial conversations, it's all about the danger of having a conversation with that other person and not accepting how much responsibility I myself have for my part of showing up no matter what and being in the conversation. But when the other person starts acting crazy, it's very important to tell yourself that that person's behavior is a result of them not feeling safe enough to have the conversation. So, notice, if possible, in a similar way that when you have that body sensation, start making up stories. I say you, I do it too, of course, we all do it. Notice that when the other person starts having their behavior, the way you quickly start assigning meaning to it. And then not only assigning meaning to it, but going the next part of how I'm going to respond to that. So, don't get hooked by that behavior. So, for example, if someone raises their voice, or even drops an F-bomb or does whatever, gets firm, starts repeating themselves, notice this, but only enough to think, Arnold is repeating himself. Arnold's getting very firm. He must be not feeling safe in this conversation, and so just breathe and just stay with it and continue to try to have a conversation if possible. Okay? Next week we'll talk about specific techniques for responding and trying to help a conversation that's getting derailed get back on track. But what you don't want to do is think to themselves, why is Arnold repeating himself? He's nuts. He's so controlling. He doesn't care about me. And, and then whatever, I'm going to take my ball and go home, or I'm going to blow up, or whatever. Because none of that actually helps with the conversation. And if you're sitting there having fantasies about how you're going to punish Arnold, then you have failed completely at your crucial conversation. So notice that when the other person does whatever they do, you can say, they're doing what they do, in the same way that I do what I do. And that all these behaviors arise because we don't feel safe enough to have a conversation. Now, if it is appropriate, there might be some steps that we could take to reestablish safety. Apologize if you've done something that really deserves apology. You can apologize if the other person can't accept your apology. then you just move on and just, that's okay. Number two, you can contrast something. If somebody feels that you've disrespected them, you can acknowledge that something was done that might have seemed disrespectful, and then contrast it with a greater purpose of what you want to create. So I know that I didn't call you like I said that I would, and I apologize for that, but I have planned a wonderful evening tonight. So apologize, contrast, and then the third thing is creating mutual purpose. So as much as possible, you want to stick with, even when things are crazy intense, what is it we're trying to do here that's positive, and get on the same page of having mutual purpose. Mutual purpose and mutual respect are ground conditions for having conversations. But we very often, when we feel disrespected, that's when things really blow up. And so, even in extremely crazy situations like, union negotiations and things like this, where mutual respect is kind of at risk, it is still possible to have conversations based on mutual purpose. Try to, whatever extent you can, to make people feel respected. So don't roll your eyes, don't curse, the rules of being polite, all of that come into play. But to some extent, sometimes you're going to, people get emotional, but don't let being emotional be a trigger for anything. Just step back and sort of say, the only thing I can really control here is me. So that's basically like kind of part one of this three-part conversation. And what I'm hoping that we can do is not only we'll sit in our circle and talk a little today, but I always recommend that people do journal work. And it's interesting because the working on, this is what I do in relationships. This is what I do in conversation. It could take you years to, the first step is admitting to yourself that you do it, but that doesn't mean that the behavior is going to disappear overnight. So the second thing is just urging yourself to be just a bit more brave and to have the conversation. So when we talk, there's the fact that we need to have these crucial conversations everywhere in life, at work, at home, but then also how do atheists in general have crucial conversations in the culture, because we are putting our voice into the pool of meaning. When somebody has ideas about what they think atheists are like, or whatever, it's only us who can step forward and sort of challenge that. And one of the things I notice as one of the people who's on the part of this church is that other atheists will often write to me and say, well, atheists believe in nothing. Oh, really? What about, that there's an actual explanation for everything? It's just a starting point. And so I think that people have developed some of these things as defense mechanisms for, I don't believe the stuff that you believe in, but then when that preacher says, well, atheists, how sad, they believe in nothing, that, atheists have said, well, okay, I'll go with that. And so, so that's part of the conversation that I also want to have, because as part of a national conversation, I think the secular voice is extremely important. And also, how do we have a secular voice where we're just bringing in our spiritual friends, our religious friends, but encouraging them, let's have a secular conversation, that they too have good reasons to value keeping, for example, religion out of politics or whatever it may be. So, thank you for listening. Okay.